Welcome to another episode of the Sooner Nation podcast, the online podcast of heartlandsports.com. I'm Matt Hofeld, excited because it's not just game week, it's almost game day. The clock has turned. We're no longer in the 8th month of the year. It is September, and the Sooners are just days away from their oh so early 11 a.m. kickoff season opener on the road against Houston. Don't let anybody fool you by saying that this is a neutral site game. It's absolutely not. I mean, it would be equivalent for a team to come in and play the Sooners somewhere in Oklahoma City. There's no way it's a neutral site. Now the good thing is that it's a big NFL stadium. In Oklahoma, fans, the way I understand it, are traveling in mass, and so you'll have a good contingent of Sooner fans there. But at the end of the day, the Cougars are waking up Saturday morning in their own backyard, in an area of familiarity where the Sooners are taking a road trip. Greg Ward Jr. That's the thing. That's the thing Oklahoma has to deal with, and I'm excited. We've got Jeremy Branham, the sideline reporter for the Houston Cougars, coming up. We're going to talk to him about Greg Ward Jr. We're going to talk to him about a whole bunch of things with this game. I'm excited to hear his take. But here's the thing: Bob Stoops said it on Monday. Everything in this offense goes through Greg Ward Jr. Now, I know that's typical for any quarterback. The quarterback and the center are the only two guys who touch the ball on every single play of the game. But it's a little different connotation with this. Greg Ward Jr. is that perfect dual threat guy. He's not incredibly accurate, but he's accurate enough, and he's got receivers that are tall enough and lengthy enough and fast enough to make you pay for not paying attention. He's smart. He knows when to tuck the ball and run. He knows when to scramble and wait for opportunity downfield. And he's strong. I mean, he's only 5'11", 185, but he's strong for his size. And he's going to be the biggest task that Oklahoma has to take on this weekend. But let's not make the mistake of going in here and thinking that this is the Oklahoma Sooners versus the Greg Ward show. Chance Allen is a guy that I kind of started following last year. I'll be honest with you, kind of got into him for some fantasy purposes on FanDuel and stuff like that. But Chance Allen's a big target. 6'3", 215. Duke Catalon is a new running back. This is a kid that was with the Texas Longhorns, decided to transfer, set out last year for the NCAA transfer rules. In 2014, not only was he a 4-star recruit, but he was the number 10 running back in that class, according to 24/7 Sports. What's Tom Herman saying about Duke Catalon? Tom Herman's comfortable comparing him to some of the best running backs he's ever been around, ever coached. So this is an offense that's loaded for bear, kind of like what Oklahoma's bringing. I think this is going to be a high-scoring. Last person with the ball has a chance to either win it or put it away. It's going to be, I don't know what the over-under is in this game. But without knowing what it is, I think I would look at the over. Cougars were number 10 in the nation last year in scoring offense, 40.4 points per game. So what do you do? How do you game plan for this offense? What should Oklahoma's defense focus on? Well, I mean, 3 things is kind of what we do. That's our format here. So let me give you 3 things. I think the first thing you have to do against the Houston defense is you have to overpower them at the point of attack. You have to win the line of scrimmage. And Oklahoma did an adequate job at that last year. It was adequate enough to get them into the playoff, but not adequate enough to advance beyond the semifinals. But opportunity's there. At least on paper, it appears that it is. Center Will Noble is the only returning starter on this Houston Cougars offensive line. So you're replacing both tackles, replacing both guards. And while Oklahoma is replacing guys like Charles Tapper and so forth, up there in the middle where Charles Walker, Jordan Wade, where those guys are going to live, that's where you have to win. You have to win the battle at the front. This is Oklahoma's first opportunity against a top 15 program to say we have fixed one of our fatal flaws from a year ago. People are going to, that's one thing the national pundits are going to look at. They're going to look at this offense and they're going to say, yep, Baker Mayfield's back and he's a stud. Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon are two of the best running backs in the nation. You got speed on the edges in Dede Westbrook. You've got a guy in Mark Andrews who's a mismatch. But what can you do up front? Because I remember the Texas game. I remember the Clemson game where Oklahoma got beaten up front. And if they're not any better up front this year than they were a year ago, then they're not going to go any further than they did last year. That's what the national pundits are going to be looking at in this game. And Oklahoma has to win the point of attack. I think the other thing you have to do, and this is kind of a no-brainer when you're playing a dual-threat quarterback like Greg Ward Jr., you've got to contain. You want to funnel everything up the middle. You don't want Greg Ward Jr. hitting the edge on you. Yeah, they're going to roll him out, and he's going to try to do some bootleg stuff. Your corner has to be the widest man on the field when you're rolling. Your defensive ends have to play containment. And you want him to move up the middle. And that's why it's so important for them to overpower Houston at the point of attack. Because if you're getting pushed back in the middle and you're trying to funnel everything in the middle, then all of a sudden your linebackers are tied up. And it's open field for a guy who literally is a star in college football. But if you overpower the point of attack and you're pushing them backwards and you've got containment on both sides, and now your quarterback's trying to run up the middle, the linebackers are free. And that leaves it open for Jordan Evans and company to do their thing. I'm really excited about Tay Evans. I think Oklahoma fans are going to be in for a treat with him. I don't see him as being a bust type of player. So how do you attack the Houston offense? Well, you overpower the point of attack. You got to funnel everything through the middle. You got to contain. And the third thing you have to do is you have to stop the run. With all the fuss that's made about Greg Ward Jr., and I'm on record saying the kid's a star, when you look at their stats last year, they were 13th in the nation rushing, 44th in the nation passing, 13th in the nation rushing, 44th in the nation passing, and they're bringing in a stud at running back. What do you think the Cougars are going to try to do? They saw the Orange Bowl footage. They're going to try to run the ball. They're straight up going to try to run on Oklahoma. And if you're a defensive coordinator, as quickly as you can, you want your opponent to go to plan B. You want him to go to plan B. You don't want them to be able to do what they came in to do. And Houston's going to try to run the football. They're going to use a combination of Greg Ward Jr. and Duke Catalon. I keep wanting to say BJ Catalon, and I don't know if these two guys are related or not. You'll remember BJ Catalon from TCU. That's one of those names that's kind of like, it's the same, but it's different. I don't know. But they're going to try to use those guys, and they're going to try to make a dent in Oklahoma's defense. And don't confuse what this offense is about. They're going to spread it out, and they're going to take shots downfield, and they're going to try to score. But they're fine. They're completely fine with moving the ball 4 yards at a time. And that's what Oklahoma can't allow. Oklahoma's got to be able to get into that backfield. They've got to create disturbance along the line. They got to keep everything funneled in the middle. And they got to stop the run. That's just plain and simple what it is. Listen to Sooner Nation, the online podcast of CrimsonandCreamMachine.com. There may not be a person who knows the Houston Cougars better than our man Jeremy Branham. So let's bring him in. Let's talk a little Oklahoma Sooners, Houston Cougars season opener football.
What special guest time now. Jeremy Branham, a Houston sports sideline reporter for the Cougars. Man, I don't think there's anybody going to have a better seat in the house than you are Saturday morning, right?
Yeah, people always say that, but sometimes it can be kind of tough to see through all the big football players. The defensive linemen and the offensive linemen on the sideline make it difficult sometimes to see. But yeah, it's a lot of fun being down on the sidelines, and looking forward to a great season. Looking forward to Oklahoma, one of the best teams in the nation, coming into Houston on Saturday.
Yeah, but you guys can go past the 30-yard line. I mean, you guys are back deep enough where you can kind of sneak down there towards the end zone and get away from those players a little bit. Hey, Jeremy, let me ask you, I mean, this is a big game for both programs to start the season. Todd Herman kind of pointed at it a little bit in his press conference this week that it's not necessarily an audition for the Big 12, but how convincing was his answer? Because he just kind of said, well, the people above me told me it's not. And the reality is he made a good point. You don't judge it by one game, but is there any thought, any talk, background area about this and the addition to the Big 12 and the potential of the Cougars coming in?
No, I think it's kind of a separation of church and state, so to speak. I don't think that there's anything synonymous with Big 12 expansion rumors and then the OU U of H game. I think it's two completely separate things on the opposite end of the spectrum. And it's like Herman said during his press conference on Monday that, the decision by the Big 12 and all the schools in the Big 12 isn't going to be short-sighted based on one game at the beginning of the season, 2016. The Big 12, they want what's best for the conference going forward for the next 30, 40, 50 years. So if the Big 12 is thinking along those lines, which I don't think they are, I don't think there's any chance that they are, it'd be kind of silly to put all the stock in just one single game when they're looking at 30, 40, 50 years of trying to build a conference to be one of the elite of the Power Fives.
Well, one guy is going to be special regardless of which conference he played in. It's Greg Ward Jr. He's the guy that everyone talks about when it comes to the Houston offense. Bob Stoops said in his conference yesterday, everything goes through number one. Everything goes through Greg Ward Jr. Tell us about him. Burst on the scene last year, special guy, and then what's different? Tom Herman said, he's taking more responsibility with the offense. What do you see different through the preseason camp to where he left off against Florida State back in December?
Greg's is a really interesting story. He was a really good high school quarterback, but was being recruited as an athlete. A lot of people had questions about his accuracy in terms of his arm. They wondered if he could be a quarterback at the Division I level, if he was big enough to be a quarterback at the Division I level. When they brought him in, they also had John O'Korn in that recruiting class. And John O'Korn was thought of to be the guy in that recruiting class. And even 2, 3, 4 games into the freshman year, John O'Korn was the starting quarterback. And he finished the season strong. He played incredibly well. And the conversation was, well, all right, we need Greg Ward to move to receiver. Greg was a player that was willing to do that because he's a team guy. He wants to win more than anything. That's the one thing that he wants to do is to win. He didn't care what position he was at. And then John had struggles in his sophomore season. And about midway, they said, all right, let's try Greg. Let's see if this will help out a little bit more. And Greg was good in that role. And then the coaching change happened, and Tom Herman, he gets called a lot of times quarterback whisperer. I don't know exactly what that means, but he's really good at grooming quarterbacks. Major Applewhite, who was a very good college quarterback in his own right, he certainly helped out the development of that as well. And I think the big thing with Greg is two things, really. One is that he's more of a vocal leader now. He's always been kind of a quiet, shy guy. He's blue collar. He's going to put in all the work. He's going to outwork you. He kind of leads by example. And Herman wanted him to be a vocal leader. He said, you're going to be quarterback. You need to talk. You need to speak up. And that was, Herman always challenges his guys no matter who you are. And that's what Ward really did, was that he became more of a vocal leader. He's taken more stock into the offense in the sense that he wants to get to the line of scrimmage. If he sees something, sees a weakness in the defense, he wants to go with it right away. He doesn't want to look over to the sideline and wait, let the defense catch up. So that's the big thing with Greg, is he's more of a vocal leader now. And he's taking charge of the offense, and he has the ability, if he sees something in the defense, to go with it right away and not hesitate by looking over at the sideline to see what the play call might be.
Let's talk about the surrounding cast for Greg Warren. I really like Chance Allen. I mean, he's a big body receiver. I remember some of the plays he made last year. Was he 6'3", 220, something like that? Who else is there? Who's Greg Ward going to look to dump it off or talk about the running backs in the backfield because you're replacing a guy from last year? Who are the tools that Ward has to work with?
I think the best offensive tool will be Duke Catalon. He was a transfer from Texas. He grew up in Houston area, went to Houston area high school, was a highly touted recruit coming out of Eisenhower in the Houston area, went off to Texas. Just it didn't work out for whatever reason. He came out, transferred to U of H last year, of course, had to sit out for transfer rules. And, we were hearing stories about Catalon last year that he was just crushing the defense, that the scout team was crushing the first-team defense because Duke Catalon was just that good. So you're losing a lot on offense in terms of the rushing attack. Kenneth Farrow's gone. He has a decent chance to make the San Diego Chargers roster. Ryan Jackson was a guy who was a contributor for all 4 years that he was with the Cougars. But a lot of people think Duke Catalon's an upgrade. They think that the Cougars will be better running the football because of Duke Catalon. Chance Allen is a good target. He kind of plays that outside receiver role where it seems like they don't get as many touches as the inside receiver guys. And, that's one area of concern with the Cougar offense is who's going to be the slot receiver. They lost to Marcus Ayers, who was an underclassman, declared for the draft, went to the Pittsburgh Steelers in the 6th round, and, the Cougars are having a tough time replacing that. They thought they had somebody, but, they had a couple of injuries to a transfer guy that they kind of penciled into that role, and his backup, a freshman who was an electrifying player, he's going to be out for the first chunk of the season. So, they're searching. One of the outside guys, Linnell Bonner, has been moved to the slot. Looks like he'll get some reps there. De'Eric King, who's a freshman, you might see him a little bit. He's actually was a quarterback his senior year in high school. He was a great quarterback who actually was committed to TCU, decommitted late, signed with the University of Houston. And, he kind of reminds me of Greg Ward, to be honest with you. But he's an electrifying player. He's a playmaker. How quickly does he adapt to the college game? You have to account for that. So that slot position is somewhat of a question. I think the Cougars would like it if they had a better answer to that question in the slot, but right now they don't. They're just going to have to figure it out on the fly.
Talking about the offensive line, you got Will Noble coming back at the center position, but really you're replacing both guards, both tackles. How strong have they looked?
Well, I think it's an upgrade on the offensive line. Last year was one of the most bizarre and strangest seasons on an offensive line that I've ever seen. It seemed like a new guy was getting hurt every single week. I don't think they had maybe once all year that they ran out the same starting offensive line that they had previously ran out. They moved a defensive line freshman over to the offensive line midway through the year. Towards the latter part of the season, they had to have walk-on tryouts to try just to fill up the depth on the offensive line. Last year was the biggest patchwork offensive line you'll ever see just because of injuries. And the injury bug killed the offensive line last year. It's pretty miraculous that it did so well offensively with how injury-riddled the offensive line was last year. So even though you're not returning many people, it's just the fact that you have some depth at offensive line. You got some big size. There was a redshirt freshman on that offensive line who was a really good high school recruit. I think the offensive line's going to be good. It's deep. It's got some guys that are still really battling for jobs. I know there's going to be a rotation at left guard. So I think the offensive line has an opportunity to be a strength for the Houston Cougars. I don't know if it's going to be week 1 of the season, but I think that the offensive line's actually going to be a lot vastly improved compared to last season.
You're listening to Sooner Nation online podcast for Heartland Sports. Our guest right now, Jeremy Branham, part of the radio broadcast crew for the Houston Cougars. Jeremy, when you look at Houston, do you think that maybe the success of the offense maybe overshadowed the defense last year? Because a lot of people talk about Greg Ward Jr. and they talk about this offense, but the defense was a top 20 in scoring defense last year, forced a crud ton of turnovers. Is there an equal balance there, or is it just a natural lean towards the offense when you talk about this football team?
That's interesting. An interesting approach to that, because I think that the people close to the program and people that follow U of H football on a very close basis would tell you the opposite, that the defense was the strength of the team. That the offense, while they put up some numbers, that they struggled at times. They were inconsistent a little bit at times last year. I would say people in the program thought for sure that the defense was the strength of the program. And, I guess I've never really looked at it from the other point of view, that from, the outside perspective, maybe it's, the offense that's getting a lot of the attention. And, Greg Ward, certainly the face of the program, the regional Sports Illustrated cover. So he's kind of the guy that gets all of the attention. But, last year, the defense is what carried the team. The defense was very good under defensive coordinator Todd Orlando, who proved to be one of the best defensive coordinators in the nation. I understand it's not at a Power 5 level, but he proved his worth, that he's a great coach. One of the best defensive minds that I've been around. Todd Orlando knows what he's doing. This year, there's a lot of turnover. They lost some guys to the NFL. How they replaced them? I think this year you'll start to see more of a balanced team. I thought last year was defensive heavy. The offense was good, but I thought the defense was great. I think you have a chance where the defense is going to be good and the offense is going to be equal to it.
Plus 21 in turnover margin. You lost three guys that was a really good secondary. Now you've got Baker Mayfield and a new crop of Oklahoma receivers coming in. They're going to spread the ball out, spread the field. What are you looking at in this offensive-defensive matchup between the Cougars and the Sooners?
Well, it's going to be how the secondary defends. To be frank with you, I think U of H will show the front seven that is comparable to a lot of teams that OU will face. Maybe even one of the better front sevens that OU will face. And I think Bob Stoops knows that. I think Oklahoma knows that. I don't think that they're taking Houston lightly at all. I mean, it's a team that won the Peach Bowl last year, beat Florida State, did it in a convincing fashion, and I think they're aware of that. If there's one area, not necessarily a concern, but one area where I need a question answered is, how does the secondary replace William Jackson, who was a first-round draft pick last year in the NFL? You mentioned all the turnovers. You missed most of those guys who were wreaking havoc in the secondary. Adrian McDonald, who's also with the Chargers. You have a Trayvon Stewart, who was a very good college football player, who seemed to, they were nicknamed the Jack Boys because they would always steal the football. So who are those guys going to be? Who's going to step up in those roles? And it's kind of a cruel task to ask them to defend Baker Mayfield, this wide-open Oklahoma offense week one, but you're going to get a lot of questions answered in that game.
Bob Stoops said that there's a little bit more sense of urgency because it's not just a season opener, but it's a season opener against Houston. In Houston, what's the feeling? I mean, you guys, you mentioned Florida State in the Peach Bowl, but also you went on the road in the second week last season and beat Louisville. What's the mindset there with the Cougar program?
I think the mindset's always pretty much the same under Tom Herman, and that's been that they're, he said this in his press conference, that they're just this little all-American conference team that no one has any respect for, and they're playing with this giant chip on their shoulder. A lot of the kids that come to U of H, that have been at U of H, they're Houston guys, mostly Texas guys that have been passed over by a lot of the bigger schools. Now, there's some exceptions to that. You've had some really good transfers that have transferred to U of H once Herman got there. The signing of Ed Oliver, who was one of the best national recruits in the nation, that every school wanted Ed Oliver on their football team, and Oliver chose to stay in Houston and play for Coach Herman and the Houston Cougars. But most of the players on the team, they felt like they've been disrespected. They weren't always the most highly recruited player on their team. They weren't very highly recruited going to college. They went to a Houston team that a lot of people don't really have a whole lot of respect for. A lot of folks in Texas call the University of Houston Cougar High. I take a huge deal of offense to that, but they hear that stuff, so they don't like it. And that's the way they play football. They play the football. They play football mad. They play football like they have something to prove, and that's what you're going to get every single game from a Tom Herman team. Is they might not be the most talented team on the field, but you're going to get their best fight every single time.
As a guy who covers the team, and obviously also when we're in these roles, we become fans of the guys that we cover. You look at, we talked about, reloading in the Houston secondary. Oklahoma is in the same boat, reloading at the linebacker position. As personally, is it good, or would you prefer that this game not be the first game of the season, but maybe week 2 or week 3?
I would probably prefer it a little bit later in the season. I kind of like, I don't know. It's kind of it's an interesting question. I think it kind of depends on your personal feel on things. I like kind of easing my way into a season. Other people like saying, all right, let's bring it on right now. See where we're at. See what we got to work on. I don't necessarily know what's best, to be honest with you. I don't know how the Cougars are feeling. I know that they're excited and ready to go. I don't think that thought has crossed their mind. Oh, I wish that we would play in week 3 or week 4 because, well, it's week 1. You got to deal with it. In my personal opinion, I think it'd be better if you kind of have a couple of games get under your belt and then play it week 3, week 4. But, sometimes you just have to play the hand that you're dealt.
Jeremy, tell Oklahoma fans who are going to be down in the Houston area this weekend, where can they get your coverage and listen to what you guys are talking about before, during, and after the game?
Yeah, we have an hour pregame show. Then, of course, the game broadcast, it's on 9:50 a.m. We'll have a postgame after that. So, if people, Sooner fans, are going into the stadium, out of the stadium, want some coverage, 9:50 would be the place to go to get that. Although it'd probably be some scarlet-colored goggles in terms of the production of it. But, we're fair, we're honest. We know that Oklahoma is a great program, and we're happy to have OU in Houston. We're thrilled that we're getting the opportunity to play them, and we certainly would love it to be a constant thing.
Jeremy Branham, sideline reporter for the Houston Cougars. Jeremy, thanks so much for your time, man. Good luck this weekend, and we'll look forward to seeing you.
You got it. Anytime.
See you, buddy.
All right, that was Jeremy Branham. Big thanks to him for jumping in here and spending some time with us. Sooners Cougars this Saturday morning in H-Town. That's what they're calling it down. That's what the kids call it these days. Let's jump back in here. Let's give a little more perspective from an Oklahoma side now. We talked about Oklahoma against the Houston offense. Now let's flip the script. How does Oklahoma win against a Houston defense that ain't bad? Cougars number 20 in the nation last year in points allowed per game. 20.7 points overall. But I don't think this is the same defense. You've got 3 guys returning on the front 7. Sorry, 4 guys returning on the front 7. And you got 1 guy returning in the secondary. Oklahoma, I mean, it's the same thing with their defense. Oklahoma has to win at the line of scrimmage. You got to keep Baker Mayfield upright. You've got to open up running lanes for Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon. You win at the line of scrimmage. Because I think what Oklahoma wants to do is exactly what Houston wants to do. And that is they want to run the football. You can't have a guy like Samaje Perine, and you can't have a backfield of Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon. You can't have those guys on the field at the same time or individually, however, whatever package they're running. You can't do that and not run the football. Yes, Baker Mayfield is a Heisman caliber quarterback. But let's not forget, and Oklahoma fans, sometimes we are quick to forget because we see so many good athletes come through this program. It's hard to remember all the things that have gone on. But in 2008, when Sam Bradford won the Heisman Trophy, DeMarco Murray and Chris Brown each rushed for over 1,000 yards that year. So you had 2 1,000-yard backs and a Heisman Trophy quarterback. No reason you can't have that again this year. But you have to win the line of scrimmage, and then you have to run the ball and let the run set up the pass. When you're starting over at receiver, and Oklahoma's not necessarily starting over, but they are starting without Sterling Shepard. And that's a pretty big step. But when you're throwing guys out there like D.D. Westbrook, when you're throwing guys out there like Mark Andrews, these guys, Jarvis Baxter, that Jeffrey Mead, whoever's going to come out there, I think OU is going to go 7 or 8 deep at receiver this year. And when you're starting over with those guys, you want to let your run set up the pass. You want that Houston front seven focused on stopping Samaje Perine, stopping Joe Mixon. That's what you want. And if you'll do that, if Oklahoma will lend itself to that, I think not only will they have success because of the talent and the caliber of those running backs, but it's going to lead to success in the passing game as well. Because it's going to do what Sam Bradford did best. Jason White did it probably better than any quarterback in the Bob Stoops era. Josh Heupel wasn't bad at it either. They're going to hit the receiver in single coverage. You find the guy that's man on man, and you hit Mark Andrews down the seam. You hit Dede Westbrook on the sideline fade. You throw underneath to Jarvis Baxter. You're going to find that guy because he's going to be there. Because if this offense works the way Lincoln Riley wants it to work, you can't stop the run and play rollover top coverage on the receivers. You have to pick your poison. By the way, those quarterbacks I mentioned, Josh Heupel, Jason White, Sam Bradford, look who was in their backfield. Kewan Jones, Adrian Peterson for Jason White. A guy by the name of Quentin Griffin for Josh Heupel. There's a correlation between great running backs and great quarterbacks. And the reason that correlation is there is because the running game sets up the passing game a lot more efficiently than the passing game sets up the running game. Oklahoma has to win the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. Then they have to establish the run, let that lead to the pass. And the third thing that they have to do, by the way, before I get into the third thing, little nugget that's lost, I think, when you're talking about the Houston Cougars, who are an exceptional football team. They're replacing 3 out of 4 guys in that secondary, and that's a secondary that literally was torched last year. Houston was 115th in the nation in pass defense last season. And now you're putting 3 new guys out there. It's kind of a 50-50. You could say that there are 3 new guys with inexperience, so Oklahoma has the advantage. Or you can say that was a secondary that was 115th in the nation last year. How can these guys be any worse? Should be fun. A lot of points are going to be scored on Saturday morning. Establish the run. Let that lead to the pass. Win the line of scrimmage. And the last thing you got to do is you got to protect the football. Why was Houston 11-1 last year? Sorry, 13-1. I don't know why I said 11-1. Why were the Cougars 13-1 last year? I'll tell you why. Here's the reason why. They were 13-1 because they were plus 21 in the turnover margin. Plus 21. That means that they recovered more fumbles. They nabbed more interceptions. 21 more times they took the ball away than they gave it up. But it wasn't a team that was without cause. They won 34-31 on the road at Louisville last year. They won 33-30 against Cincinnati, 35-34 against Memphis. Their one loss on the road at Connecticut was 17-20. Protect the football. Protect the football, and you've got yourself more than a puncher's chance at winning this game. Prediction time as we get ready to close out the podcast. Sooner Nation, the online podcast of Crimson. Oh, I almost did it. I almost did it. 10 years will bring that out of you. The online podcast of Heartland Sports, heartland-sports.com. No longer Crimson and Cream Machine. By the way, it's a great site. I'm not one of those us or them type people. Both sites with great content. Those guys that took over there are doing a bang-up job. Big 12 rundown, and then I'll give you my prediction on the OU Houston game. First thing I got to say is this. There's 6 teams in the Big 12 that have garbage games this weekend. 6 teams that have garbage games. And I'm not even going to talk about them. Baylor, Oklahoma State, Kansas, Iowa State, TCU, Texas Tech. If you lose this weekend, you should get your walking papers. Yes, even you, Kansas. I think you're playing Rhode Island or something like that. If you lose this weekend, you get your walking papers. But what about the games that are actually worth watching? Let's talk about those. Kansas State gets the ball rolling for the Big 12 on Friday night, playing at Stanford. I talked earlier in the week on our first podcast about Bill Snyder and the Wildcats. Look, Kansas State's only a 14-point underdog in this game. I don't see how. I want the Big 12 to represent itself very well, but come on. What did we see out of Kansas State last year that would make you think that they can play within 14 points of Stanford on the road at Stanford? They were 93rd in the nation in scoring defense. 166.7 yards per game they gave up on the ground, and now they got to play against Christian McCaffrey. Give me Stanford and the points, and I'll be cheering for Kansas State to prove me wrong. West Virginia, Missouri. Man, how much fun is this game going to be? If you get a chance to tune this in, tune it in. I think there's going to be a lot of points scored in this game. Mountaineers are a 10-point favorite. I'll take them. I'll take the Mountaineers in 10 against Missouri on the road. Sunday, Texas versus Notre Dame. The Longhorns, 3.5-point underdogs. Yeah, give me the Irish. You got to prove it, Texas. Right now, you're hanging your hat on one win in the Charlie Strong era. One win in the Charlie Strong era. That was the win over Oklahoma. When your coach has been there for 2 seasons and you've got one win to brag about, guess what you've got? Some of you guys, I think, have guessed it. You've got John Blake. Remember when John Blake beat Texas and all the OU fans were like, woohoo, yeah, our coach, he's got the ship turned around. Oh, you didn't make a bowl game that year. That win, other than a momentum swing for 2 weeks, that win didn't mean beans. And right now for Texas, that win doesn't mean beans. You've got one win and nothing that would indicate that you can play within 3.5 points of Notre Dame. So give me the Irish and 3.5 points. And I guess that leaves us Oklahoma and Houston. Sooners are 11.5-point favorites in this game. Holy cow, guys. I don't gamble, and there's a reason why, because I'm terrible at it. But even if I did, I don't think I'd play this game. This game, on paper, should be a field goal game. It should be a field goal. It should be a field goal in Oklahoma's advantage. But I don't think it's going to be. I think Oklahoma wins. And I think they win between 14 and 17 points. But there's so many question marks there. First game of the season, so many things out there. And that's why I threw the question out to Jeremy. Would you prefer this game be week 1 or would you prefer it being later on in the season? Because we don't know. There's so many things about both of these teams. When you look at it, you just say, I don't know. But what I do know for right now, I'll take Oklahoma. Let's go 35-21. Let's give Oklahoma 14 points. 35-21 over the Houston Cougars. We'll be back next week. We'll talk more about it. Hopefully we're talking about a win and looking forward to Louisiana Monroe. That's going to be a fun game to preview. That might be one of the garbage games in our Big 12 rundown next week that we won't talk about. Essentially, if there's no point spread that we can find, it's a garbage game, and there'll be a point spread on Louisiana Monroe. Hey, thanks for listening. Have a great weekend. You can check us out Saturday morning, all day Friday. We'll have coverage. Saturday morning, we'll have an open game thread. Heartland-sports.com. You follow us on Twitter, @SportsHeartland. Have a great weekend. Enjoy college football. It is upon us. Boomer Sooner, everybody.
When I wake up, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you.